So I hope you guys are ready. Tighten your seatbelts as we dive right into each objection, and we'll be looking at each one very quickly, really, and see what God has to say about this. Because it's not about me. I'm just representing God here, and see what He has to respond, what the Bible really says about these things. So, first objection. Well, I guess the definition. So atheism, he defined it as just waiting for sufficient evidence, and it's not really denying or accepting. I guess it's more, his definition is more agnostic. It's like, I don't really know, which is a humble opinion, I guess, because let's be honest, there's so much we don't know to be able to say conclusively there is or there is no God, let's say, even in a scientific sense, because how much of the universe have we really discovered? Do we really know everything in the universe? No. And so every day we're discovering something new. Perhaps one of those discoveries is God. So I say that atheism is not only denying the existence of God in my definition, but it's rejecting the power of God even in its existence. Because I mean, there's so many people who know God exists, but they live their lives like it doesn't, which was one of the lines in the poem. And the flip side of that is those who don't believe God exists but act like it does, or those who those who act like God exists. It's really it's all in the acting, like how your life is, what you do, that tells us about what you believe in. So it's not a mere it's not a mere statement, stating or expression or profession of facts. It's actually what goes on in your life from day to day. So he says, I personally have never observed a God. And that's true. In fact, nobody has observed God really, because John 1:18 says, no man hath seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, though, which is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. You see? So it's true. I agree. So nobody has seen God at any time. But Jesus Christ has declared him. And maybe let's explain a bit, why is Jesus coming into the picture here? Well, God created perfect people, Adam and Eve. They were perfect, perfect, perfect. He gave them a commandment to ensure that their safety and their protection from evil, but they rejected that commandment. They broke that commandment, I should say. And sure were the results, the consequences. They had to be driven out of the Garden of Eden, and so God had to find a way to bridge that gap. But God is loving, He's wise. The plan wasn't abrupt. It was not an aftermath of the event. It had been kept secret, it says, from the foundations of the world. So God had this plan in mind. How is He going to save uh, people who sin or people who reject Him? And so He sent Jesus Christ to die for us. We, in our sinful state, cannot see God and live. That's why no man has seen God at any time. Because should we see God in our sinful state, His very presence would consume us. And so He sends Jesus. Now, here's something about Jesus. Jesus is human and divine at the same time. And that is pretty amazing. That's all we need, because with His divinity, He connects His hand to God, and with His humanity, He connects His hand to us. And thus a bridge is, you know, uh, the gulf is fixed, as it were, and now we are reconnected back to God. So, yeah, sure, I agree. That's so true. And that's why we need Jesus, because only he can reflect God. It says in Hebrews that He's the express image of God. In fact, Jesus says, no man comes to the Father except by me. And that's really pretty profound, because, and the reason why the title of the poem is Jesus Does Not Believe in Atheists is because there's many other gods on this planet. And the difference with Jesus, though, is not that He's not a God, He's the God. He's the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through him. So if you miss Jesus, then you can't really have a connection with the Father, and that means you are really lost. Or really, that's what it means. He that has the Son has life, and he that doesn't have the Son does not have life. Which is why my content is Christocentric, because I believe Jesus is the only person, the only name given under heaven by which we must be saved. And so, yeah, I hope that was not a long response, but sure. Next one. I have never encountered a person who claimed to have observed God. So I think perhaps in life, in modern life, you haven't um, encountered a person who says they've seen God. I mean, I haven't seen God necessarily in person. It's all online. But yeah. So, but First Peter 1:8 to 13 tells us that these disciples saw Jesus Christ, right? Whom having not seen, sorry, actually, before we get to the disciples, there's this online thing I was talking about. So, whom having not seen, you love, in whom, though now you see him not, yet believing, you receive with joy unspeakable and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, even the salvation of your soul. So, you don't have to see the person to believe that they exist. So, you don't have to see them physically. However, you can experience them, and that's what this verse is talking about. But we know that the disciples saw Jesus Christ in person. And you read that in First John 1:3, that which we have seen and heard, these are the disciples, declare we unto you, that ye also may have fellowship with us. And truly, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. So the disciples saw Jesus. They ate with him. They talked with him. They saw him being crucified. They saw him risen, and we believe their testimony. And that's called faith. We just believe it because it's believable and because it's true. I mean, historically, whatever other way you want to look at it, but we know that Jesus Christ existed. That's irrefutable. And so we know his life, we know how he lived, and when you study his life, you can't help but just accept that he is God, because he is. So it's pretty much how I would respond to this question, that obviously we haven't seen a person who has encountered God, but we've heard those who have, and we still encounter God, not physically, but at a deeper level than physical. And I believe spiritual is more powerful and impactful than physical. In fact, if you notice, the things that have much impact in our world are not things that we see. It's the invisible things, like COVID-19, or the small things, really, things that happen at a microscopic level. Those are things that really fundamentally change things, change the world. In any case, I mean, the wind. Forgot about the wind. So yeah, that's my response. What you guys think about in the comment. By the way, if you have a better response than me, go ahead and put it in the comments, and let's study and grow together. So I have never encountered a person like, same question. So Peter comes in and says, hey, we have not followed cunningly devised fables. So these are not stories and fairy tales, when we made to you the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. And this is pretty cool. Like, you read so many historical accounts, historical books, for example, like the history of any figure in history, Aristotle, Socrates. We believe these things to be true, even though we never really saw these people, right? So, does the fact that we didn't see them negate their existence? Do we have to see everything for that thing to exist? That sounds like so much power to us. Like, we are now the creators, but not so. So things can exist independent of our knowledge of them. Third point, I know of no accounts of persons, people, claiming to have observed a God that were willing, that God willing, or able to demonstrate or verify their observation for authenticity, accuracy, or validity. Now, the first part of the sentence I understand, the last part not quite. But I guess what you're asking is, Did God really meet anybody and revealed himself to them with authenticity and accuracy and validity that, something that's verifiable and, proof worthy? Well, I couldn't think of anybody else but Moses. Moses. More to Moses. And there's more to Moses here. I'm doing a series, Journey in the Bible. You guys should know about this. And we are in season 2. We're looking at Exodus, and there's an episode where we talked about Moses, and you guys should go watch it. And really, now that I think about it, that book Exodus really has an answer to an atheist as well, because Pharaoh was kind of an atheist in the sense that he didn't believe in Jehovah. And so, anyways, go watch it, guys, and I hope you like the videos there and follow this series. I'll put the link down below. But Exodus 3:4 says, "And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses, and he said, Here I am." And then the story continues. God reveals himself to Moses, and obviously he wasn't able to see the full physical features of God, but God revealed himself with the greatest authenticity, accuracy, and validity there is. God says, God, merciful and gracious, full of mercy, forgiving iniquity. God describes who he is not in terms of form and physical features, but he describes who he is in terms of qualities, character, ability, and nothing can beat that. This God forgives, he loves, he listens. How can you doubt that? I mean, and he does. He died for us. History proves that Jesus just didn't die for a show. So, moving on. I have never been presented a valid logical argument which also employed sound premises that lead deductively to a conclusion that a God exists. This one is interesting. So, I guess the poem that I did was an attempt to present a logical argument, but really when it comes to the Bible or God, argument doesn't work. And the reason why that is because God has the luxury of even being not illogical, but I mean, he created logic. So what, like, he can't be confined to logic as well. Like, he works on a bigger frame than logic. But anyways, the Bible does not attempt to prove the existence of God. Exactly what I just said, because because he works outside of logic. He doesn't have to follow our rules. The Bible doesn't begin with a high school essay rehearsing the arguments for with the arguments against before reaching a conclusion. The Bible simply says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth," because that statement is undebatable. He did. You can see it, you know it, and so God doesn't have to prove himself. In fact, the only discussion in the Bible on the possible non-existence of God is only found in Psalm 14 and Psalm 53. In both cases, it says, "The fool had said in his heart, there is no God." Now, this is not an attack on the person who commented, or any person who identifies themselves as atheist. This is what the Bible says that such a person is. Because, again, Romans 1 brings it up here as well and says that these people who say God doesn't exist, they know that God exists, because if you read Romans 1:21, it says, "For the invisible things, declare the power of God." You just look at nature and you know that, these things had to be created. You look at the order in our universe. I mean, even the disorder, because the more disorder we have means that the opposite is true. There must be another order equivalent to that. And to have that is not something that can just happen on its own. So, the reason why the Bible doesn't address atheism in a sense that atheists would love it to be addressed, that is, logical arguments, is because God has no time for arguments. He he created he created everything, including the languages, including our ability to make arguments. So it's like it's a waste of time. But anyways, there are some few resources you can find to help out in terms of atheism. By the way, I got this response from Amazing Discoveries. It's a great, great team, great ministry. They are doing an amazing job and they have all the answers that you need. And there's a few videos you can watch down there, God's answers to modern atheism. There's a testimony by Professor Walter Veit. He he actually was an atheist and he converted. So was the other guy. But this guy is a professor and he went through, he was a professor of zoology at the university in South Africa, I believe. And he has a pretty powerful testimony to share. And he tries as well to give some evidences. But I won't go into the evidences for now. But we know that the main ones are, creation. It didn't happen on its own. Well, the Big Bang Theory doesn't explain it that well. So, and many other things. Yeah, so I hope this was enough. If not, you guys help me in the comments. But moving on. Number six, I have never observed a phenomenon in which the existence of God was a necessary antecedent for the non or probable explanation for the causation of that phenomenon. It's like, how about life? How about being born again, where you have a person that was corrupt and cruel, but after hearing the gospel, their life is transformed and they now are no longer the same and now they do good. How about the whole observable universe? How did that really happen? That phenomenon depends on God to happen. What's the other explanation? Nothing? I think that's a cheaper explanation. So, um, anyways, moving on to number seven. Several proposed and generally accepted explanations for the observable phenomena that were previously based on the agency of gods, so creation, all the good stuff. They have subsequently been replaced with rational, natural explanations, each substantiated with evidence that excluded the agency of gods. I've never encountered vice versa. Well, I think there's quite enough for both, to be honest. But I love the word used here, which is replaced and and excluded. That sounds like intentional to me. That the people who did these things, they were not really driven by sincere seeking of truth, but they perhaps maybe had their own preconceived ideas and biases, and everybody has biases, by the way, and preconceived ideas. So there's nobody that can say you know I'm not bent towards something. So there are some scientists, obviously, these scientists who came up with the ideas of the Big Bang and all this. It's because deep within them they don't believe the idea that God exists, and the whole Big Bang is an attempt to find another solution because they're not satisfied with the first one. So yeah, it has been replaced by people who replaced it, and everybody does what they want at the end of the day. But even though it has been replaced by them, it still remains irreplaceable to others. So it's an interesting one here. And he says more rational, natural explanations. Let's start with the natural selection. It's not really all rational, and there are many irrational things in there. The evolution theory, the Big Bang theory, they're all theories, most of them irrational. Anyways, I put Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton on the page here to show you that these are great geniuses of our time. Well, it's not our time, but whatever time they existed in. And interestingly, they believed God must exist, right? Because they knew that there has to be a God, and this, despite in spite of the fact that they were great scientists, and so you see that great harmony with science, the rationality you're talking about, and natural explanations, which they go in depth than we do, and yet they believed God existed. So science and God doesn't have to be incompatible. In fact, they are really compatible if seen in the right way. Almost there. Two more questions to go. I have never experienced the presence of a God through intercession of the angels, divine revelation, the miraculous act of divinity, or any occurrence of a supernatural event. Right. So my response to this is, yeah, it's possible. I mean, there are many people who haven't experienced the presence of God. Many people. But the good news is you can. And Acts 2:21 tells us that it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And that's our promise. So all you have to do is call upon the name of the Lord, and you will experience that intercession, not of angels, but the intercession of Jesus Christ himself. Because remember, he's the bridge between heaven and earth, and without him, we're eternally disconnected and lost from existence. Really, we perish without Jesus. And so Jesus is our high priest in heaven right now, by the way, and he intercedes for our sins. He, through his death, life, and well, life, death, and resurrection, we are able to be reconnected back to God. We are now able to experience God. We're now able to very soon see God face to face. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. That's the promise. Moving on. Every phenomenon that I have ever observed has emerged from necessary and sufficient antecedents over time without exception. In other words, I've never observed a phenomenon, entity, process, object, event, process, substance, system, or being that was created ex nihilo. That is, instantaneously came into existence by the solitary volition of a deity. So, again, this is a complex one, but just because you haven't observed or experienced something doesn't make it non existence or even ineffectual. So, here's some phenomena so that emerge from God being the one who actually brings them into existence. Things like being born again, really. Like he's God is the one who creates a new heart within us. But maybe that's a late argument or a late point to mention. Let's just go back to the beginning again. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. For 6 days, God's existence, God spoke things into existence. So he is the antecedent to everything. Because he said, let there be light, and there was light. Let there be a firmament, and there was a firmament. Let there be, fish and birds, and it existed. So by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, you know, and by the breath and the host of heaven by the breath of his mouth. For he spake, and it was, he commanded, and it stood fast. That's my response to this question. Because when God speaks, things happen. Now, how about we fast forward to the New Testament, stories that truly existed, historical facts. Jesus healed, you know, the woman with the issue of blood, you know, just touches the hem of his garment and she's healed. That sounds like Jesus being the antecedent to things happening. Now, just because we haven't experienced these things ourselves doesn't mean that they're not true. Now, coming back to a modern time, Jesus still touches people, God still heals. There are testimonies, many testimonies about how God has worked in people's lives. Perhaps I should share mine one of these days, but really everything that happens in our lives is by the antecedent. God is the one who makes it happen. So, and last but not least, all claims of a supernatural or divine nature that I have encountered have neither been refuted to my satisfaction or do not present as falsifiable. I love what you mentioned at the end. It doesn't present as falsifiable. I love that because it doesn't have to be according to the rules of logic that were instituted by man. So yeah, God cannot be falsified, right? God God does not have to play by our rules. In fact, I would even go far to say God doesn't even need to be verified. It's either you believe in Him or you don't, and each has consequences. Because this is not a game of academics or trying to confirm or satisfy an equation or a formula. It's about life and death and whether you believe that what God claims to be is true. So it's about faith here, but each has consequences, of course. So lastly, all of these facts, the 10 we just went through, not really facts, I'll just call them statements, lead me to the only rational conclusion. Only rational. Okay. That concurs with the realities that have been presented. And that is the fact that there is no good reason for me to acknowledge the existence of a God. Um, right. Okay. Fine. No good reason. But there is a reason. It could be a bad reason. It could be a reason that doesn't satisfy. But there's a reason. And I love how he says he doesn't acknowledge. There's no reason to acknowledge God. I love the word acknowledge again because we know God exists. It's yeah, it's a matter of just acknowledging it or not, really, because we just know it. Like how you know you exist. You know there must be something bigger and higher than all this. You know that things didn't just make themselves. You know that. So, but I understand where you're coming from, and I hope that this discussion helped to give a reason to not believe in the existence of God. Many people do that, but really believe in the power of God to change your life and to save you from whatever it is that you're going through right now. The sin, the doubt, the the feeling of unworthiness, the void that is within the heart. Only God can satisfy that. So I hope this helped. I hope this helps. I have heard often that atheism is the denial of the Abrahamic God. But denial is the active rejection of a substantiated fact once credible evidence has been presented. Well, I agree. I agree. I should say, though, that the evidence has been presented all along. Jesus Christ came, He is the evidence. He died on the cross, He rose again. These are historical facts. He has given us His words, historical facts. And He says, if if you want to save your life, you lose it. If you want to be my disciple, then take your cross and follow me. He says there has to be some self-denial that needs to happen. And then he says it's not even easy to make it, to find God, because there's so many obstructions and so much opposition as well. And so, but I love what you say that denial is active rejection once evidence has been presented. Well, that's what I'm saying, that the evidence has been presented. John 3:16. In fact, Jesus says to Nicodemus that we tell you things that we know, the things we have seen, but you don't believe us. So Jesus is, kind of like, why don't you believe? And and the Bible says there are three that bear witness in heaven: the Father, the Son, and all these are one. But back to the testimony that we haven't believed, Isaiah 53, that's prophecy right there. It speaks of how Jesus was going to come and die. And and sadly the Jewish people, even though most of them were religious, didn't believe it. So Isaiah 53 cries and says, "Who has believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed?" So God has presented Himself. He has presented His case. It's done. However, like I said, He doesn't present Himself the way we expect or the way we want. However, He's gracious enough to present Himself even to our level. And so he sent Jesus Christ, who was God. God became man. If that is not enough evidence for God, then fine. But you're actually denying it though. And so that's really a struggle there to deal with. But atheism, he says, is simply withholding any acknowledgement until sufficient credible evidence is introduced. And I love this, right? Like, okay, I'm not denying, I'm just waiting for evidence. And yeah, that's true. That's true. And I actually appreciate this, because this is not someone who's pushing things away. This is a person who wants to know and to learn. And that's why I was moved to do this video, to share the little I know, and hopefully this helps. Um, but yeah, so I hope you can examine the evidence we've provided so far, which is the person Jesus Christ, who is the finest evidence of God's existence. He's the express image. So if Jesus doesn't prove to you the existence of God, a loving, caring God, then okay, fine. But that's the only evidence there is, really. So I hope you examine that evidence and see if it makes sense to you. And then he says it is natural, rational, and prudent to be skeptical of unsubstantiated claims, especially extraordinary ones. Yes, I love that. And Jesus makes pretty extraordinary claims. And that's why it's worth looking into him and see what exactly is Jesus saying when he says, I am the light of the world. When he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. When he says, I and the Father are one. When he says, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have life. When he says that without me you can do nothing. When he says, I will come again, that where I am, there you may be also. When he says again, behold, I come quickly. These are extraordinary claims. And I believe that to be the only evidence of God's existence, Jesus Christ himself, which is why in the poem, the finest evidence I gave was, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And so, my brother, I thank you for your honest comment, and I hope this is a cordial response to you and to anyone else who had these questions. And I hope that you are blessed, and I pray that you will find the truth, because Jesus has already told us without him we can do nothing. And if we don't have Jesus, then we are lost. But anyways, take your time, go through the Gospels, read about Jesus Christ, and see for yourself the God, and experience for yourself God. All right. Thank you, and Happy New Year.